It was such a boring day at school. I was so glad that it was over and couldn't wait to get home. So I left school and waited for my driver on the sidewalk. He would usually be there before I was out, but that day he was running late. I was in my own thoughts, waiting, when suddenly I heard someone calling my name from behind the tree. "Chase," said a female voice. So I walked over to see who it was. And as I saw her, I got confused. It was nobody I knew or had ever met. "How do you know my name?" I asked. But without answering my question, she said, "Don't tell a soul about this," and ran away. But before we move on, like this video and watch the whole story for some surprises. From behind, I saw my driver had finally arrived to pick me up. Maybe that's why she ran, I thought. I got into the car and we headed home, but the entire time through the drive, and in the house too, I was just thinking about that mysterious woman and how she knew me. I grew so curious that I wanted to ask my dad about it at dinner, but then I remembered that she told me not to tell anyone, so I didn't. The next day, while I was on my way to school, I asked my driver to come and pick me up an hour later than usual. "Is there any reason, sir? I'd have to answer to your father if he would want to know," he said. I knew he was going to ask that. "I just have some basketball practice after classes," I replied nervously because it was a lie, obviously, but thank God he didn't notice that. So as soon as the school day was over, I ran outside to meet the mysterious woman. But she wasn't there, so I waited. 10 minutes passed, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and still she wasn't there. I was getting worried. My car would be here soon. Where is she? I thought. Right then I heard, "Chase, you're here." It was the same woman. "Yeah, I am, and I have a lot of questions, but we don't have much time," I replied. But she didn't say anything. She just stood there looking at me with teary eyes, as if I had onions on me or something. So I thought I would just ask, "How do you know my name? Why did you come to see me here and not at my house? Why can't I tell anyone about you?" I asked, along with a bunch of other questions. I was just so curious. I was not ready for what she said next. "Chase, I am your mother," she said. It came like a shock to me, and I couldn't believe it. "Is this a joke?" I said, as I was even more confused than before. "Look, we don't have time right now, and this is not the place. I will explain everything to you, but you have to come visit me," she replied, and asked for my notebook and pen. Then she wrote an address and said, "This is my apartment. It'll be safer there." After that, she gave me the same teary-eyed look and left. My ride arrived just minutes after that, and I headed home. But the confusion didn't leave me for once. I couldn't focus on anything because of that. Especially because my dad had told me that my mother had died because of complications at childbirth. Why would my dad even lie to me about that if she was alive all this time? That lady was probably just messing with me, I thought, and went on with my daily life. But as the weekend was approaching, I got more and more restless following an intense urge to know the truth, or at least what the woman who claimed to be my mom had to say. So I had to think of an excuse to get out of the house before I went to visit her. For that, just a day before, while we were having dinner, I asked my dad if I could go out with my friends the next day. "Yes, of course, son. Miller will take you," he replied. My dad was overprotective of me, but it would be a big problem if Miller, my driver, took me there. So I hurriedly replied, "Dad, I don't want to show off, and I'm 17 now. I can go on my own, independently." "My son wants to be independent," he said, and started laughing almost as if he was making fun of me. "Dad, please," I said again. "Okay, you get 5 hours of independence," he replied. I was so relieved, as that was all I needed. The next day, I took out my car and headed out. It was one of those rare days when I get to drive on my own, so I drove to the address the woman had given me. As I reached it, I parked my car and went directly to her apartment. I was getting more and more nervous about what I was going to learn as her apartment was approaching. When I reached it, I knocked on the door and waited. She instantly opened the door and invited me in and closed the door hurriedly. "Were you followed?" she asked. "What? Why? No." I got more and more confused every time she said something. "That's good then," she said, and sat me on the sofa. She brought me an apple juice, sat across from me, and started explaining. "Your father and I met 18 years ago at a party. He was so nice and charming that I was instantly drawn to him," she said. She told me that after meeting there, they started meeting more often, and in just weeks, she was in love with him. But there was another side to him that I didn't know until it was too late. I was pregnant with you, she said. What side? I asked. I was shaken to my core after what she told me next. She told me that my dad was a foreign crime lord who fled here and started working as a mob, and because of his wealth and no evidence, no one could ever catch him. After figuring out all of that, she tried to run away while I was still in the womb, as she didn't want his influence on me. But she was unsuccessful, and my father held her captive until I was born. After you were born, he used his money to hire the best lawyers to build a case against me and keep me away from you. And I had to wait until you became of age where you could understand, she said, and started crying. I couldn't figure out what to say, and I didn't know whether to believe her or not, so I had to ask her more questions. How do you know you got the right person? And what proof do you have that I'm your son? I asked. I have been following you for years, not to sound wrong. And yes, I don't have any proof, but I can prove it. We can do a DNA test, or you can just ask your father, she replied. And that's what I did. I left there and came home directly to talk to my father. He was sitting in the living room, talking on the phone. Did you lie to me about my mother being dead all this time? I asked without saying anything else. My dad hung up the phone and turned to me with a confused look. What? He replied. So I asked again, did you hide from me that my mother was alive all this time? He didn't say anything for the moment. He was not angry, just calm, and a few minutes later he asked me how I came up with it. So I told him everything that had happened about my meeting with the mysterious woman who claimed to be my mother. After hearing everything that I said, he stood up and said, "You need to stop seeing that woman." And then he paused for a while and added, "If you do as I say, I'll buy you a brand new car and transfer $100,000 to your account, and you can spend it any way you like." I couldn't believe what had just came out of my dad's mouth. He offered me $100,000 and a car, which cleared my doubt in an instant. He was actually trying to hide and keep me away from my mother all this time. He was a liar, and how dare he think that he could buy my choice with money? "You can't pay me to not see my mother," I shouted and stormed off. Then I started thinking about how to bring my dad around to let my mother stay with us. I was not just settling for meeting her once or twice after finally having her in my life after 17 years. I had to do something exceptional so that my father wouldn't even have a choice. So I came up with a plan to gather evidence of my dad's wrongdoings. At first, I went to meet my mother again and explained everything to her. I hugged her and cried, as it was the first time I'd ever felt motherly love. At some time we discussed my plan and how I would carry it out. "You've grown to be a young, smart boy, but remember, be careful," she said as I was about to leave. As planned, before going to the house, I made a stop at the store to buy some spy cameras and recorders. After getting them, I headed home. After reaching the house, I checked if my dad was home or not. I saw that his car was not there, and the whole house was empty. So, taking advantage of that moment, I snuck into his office and hid the spy cameras and recorders. While I was at it, I heard a car pull up in our driveway. It must be my dad. If he finds me here, the whole plan will be flushed down the toilet, I thought, and started running out of the room. I was successfully able to get out of the office and into my room just in time before Dad could see me. After that, I waited for a few days for the camera to record something solid. In the meantime, I was regularly meeting up with and discussing the progress of the plan with my mom. Being around her made me so happy and content. Then one day, I decided to check the cameras to see if it had recorded some good evidence. So while my dad was not in the house, I snuck into his office again and took out the cameras. I was shocked when I saw what the camera had recorded. My dad actually was a mob, and he carried around a gun too. There was a recording of him and some other guys beating up a man in the office, and a few other things that were enough to send him to jail. But that was not my plan. I just wanted us to be a normal family with both my parents in it. So that night, I brought my mom to the house to finally confront my dad. When he came in, we played all the recordings on the TV. My dad's face went pale when he saw that. "Dad, I'm sorry I had to do this, but I have copies of these recordings stored at multiple locations. If you don't give up the mob life and accept Mom to be part of the family, I will have to give them to the police," I said with my mother at my side. "Are you crazy?" he replied in an angry tone. "No, I know what I'm doing, and I'll do whatever it takes to have Mom in my life," I replied. He told me that it was not going to be easy to give up the mob life once you've started, even if you wanted to. "Do it for us, Dad. It's not easy, but it's possible, and we will help you," I said comfortingly, and my dad agreed. Thanks for watching. Have your parents ever paid you to do something you didn't want to do? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the other videos on the channel.